Hey, everybody, welcome to the TEConnect podcast. I'm John Martin.
And I'm Dean Reverman.
I'm putting my Coke away because it's in the frame, and
Oh,
Marco doesn't
I
like
see.
it when
No,
I advertise stuff. But yes, folks, I do drink Coke from time to time. If you haven't already told by our loosey-goosey attitude to start this episode, Dean and I are chatting about some TEC Bytes.
TEC Bytes.
You know,
that's right.
To fill in from sometimes and talk about some random topics.
Yes.
Business.
Have we really done this 19 times?
19 times we've done this.
We have been doing this for 4 years.
Yeah,
so I guess, a couple times a year.
We're going on like almost 5 years at this point. I mean,
dang, bro.
4.5 years, I guess, I'd say.
Yep.
Worth of episodes.
That's fair.
Yeah.
That's fair.
200 plus episodes. Only 19 times we've had to fill in.
I love these.
With these. But these are fun. I think
Bytes,
people like these. These are well engaged episodes. Folks like this
Yes.
stuff. So this week we're going to talk a little bit about adults who haven't had kids. We're going to talk about hybrid work. We're talking about air taxis. We're talking about answering the phone, the meaning of U.S. state names, workplace jargon, and because I think Dean wanted me to spend like 3 hours plus at the end of this episode talking about television.
I knew this would take you down a rabbit hole.
I knew you did it. As soon as I saw that, I'm like, Dean set me up for this.
Because I know nothing about these, except for maybe a handful.
Well, that's the part of the episode where if you're not someone who's invested in TV, you might want to like skip ahead 20 minutes because I'm going to probably have a lot to say.
I figured you would.
All that plus what's TEConnecting with us. It's time to plug in and get connected.
Welcome to the TEConnect podcast. It's time to get connected.
Let's jump in here, man. Let's get some of these topics because I'm going to be honest. I really only care about talking about the last topic. No, I'm not kidding.
Because you're an expert.
But let's jump through some of these other ones.
No doubt about it.
Kick us off with one about. I keep wanting to say adults having kids, but that's typically how it works. That's how it should be working. But
no,
adults that's not having kids.
You are so out of touch with the modern. So we've all heard the statistics, right, about how populations are plummeting, not just here in the U.S., but everywhere. And I don't know what the commentary is. I'm not a psychologist. I'm not gonna. It's just intriguing. This Pew research. There's a lot of good information in here. So Pew came out with a study on U.S. Basically, what is it? The experiences of the U.S. adults who don't have children. And the headline is 57% of adults under 50 who say they're unlikely to ever have kids say a major reason is they just don't want to. 57% of adults under 50 they just don't want to have kids, or they just simply don't want to have. And that's one of those headlines. It's like, wow, that's a lot of people. And when you dig into the data, there is some very, I don't know, some shifts in perceptions that have taken. It's not like, oh, last year it was this and now this year. Over the last 10, 20 years or so, but you are starting to see some dramatic changes. So 31% of those aged. So this particular survey really did a pretty good job of two populations. Population A is anybody who's 50 years and younger. Population B is anyone who's 50 years and older. I'm going to focus in on the 50 years and younger because to me, those
are the ones that are still technically in childbearing age.
Yes,
typically.
Yes. So when you hear about all this labor shortages,
unless you're George Clooney and you can have beautiful young wives that are having kids for you when you're 70 or 80.
I didn't know that. Is he having lots of kids?
No, I mean he's.
Is he pulling an Elon where he's got like 9 kids running around?
He doesn't have that many, but he's again he's a man of age and he's had children.
He is a man of age,
even though he's in his 60s or maybe 70s by now. I think he's still in his 60s.
Gotcha.
I apologize if George Clooney, if you're actually not that old, but because you seem like one of those men who's going to age ridiculously well, so it doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
Anyway, go on.
Because when you look at the survey, so they start asking reasons why, and again, this is a really good survey. It's not that long of a read, but you can dig in.
There is. I started digging through the data, and then I realized there was like 7 pages of data. I'm like, okay, I can't go through all of this.
No, you can't.
But it's well researched.
Oh, it's very well researched, and you look at it, and so the top responses for those. And I am going to talk about the 50 and older now. they say, well, it just didn't happen. That's the biggest reason why is they just didn't happen. Meanwhile, those in the younger group are most likely to say they just don't want to have kids. I mean, so when you think about it, if you're 50 years and younger, there's a significant portion of people that simply just don't want to have kids. Majorities in both groups say that not having kids has made it easier for them to afford things they want, have time for hobbies and interests, and save for the future. So there's a couple ways you can look at that. To me, there's a very depressing way to look at that. It's all the me culture, right? Like all of those answers are me. It's I want, me time for hobbies. It's not very. You see where I'm going with that?
I see.
It's not. You're smiling, but it's
a hint of selfishness, and I get it. I understand where you're coming from.
Yeah. I mean, it totally. It's when those are the biggest reasons. It's like, wow, what. I don't know. I don't know what that says about society, because I'm sure there's a lot of contributing factors. And really, one thing that this survey didn't do was try to answer maybe some of those societal contributing factors. Is it we're online more? Is it mobile devices in everybody's hands? Is it a less connected society? I don't know. But this just kind of again drilled into some of the reasons why. So one of the charts that I'll call out. As to reasons why. So they took a look at that. The biggest reason why is they just didn't want to. So when you look at, again, adults 18 to 49, 57% said they just didn't want to. 44% said they want to focus on other things. The number 3, the top reason why, concerns about the state of the world. So 38% of those that are 18 to 49 are concerned about the world, if you will. Then you get into other things like they can't afford it, or concerns about the environment, which, had some of these have very dramatic dichotomies. Right. The younger kids, or not kids if you're 50 years older, but the younger folks were more concerned about the environment, where the older folks, that was not a consideration at all for them. So, it's interesting to look at the data. Again, the top 3 just didn't wanted to focus on other things, concerned about the state of the world. That's why they're not having it. I don't know. Did you have a comment on that real quick before I go into some of the other ones?
No, give it what you get, because I got a tiny bit of a soapbox to get on for this one.
Okay.
That I'll wrap things up.
Yeah. And then a majority of adults, when they asked them about, who never had kids, think that this has helped them in a number of ways. Number 1, it's made it easier for them to afford the things they want. Number 2, having time for hobby and interest. And number 3, saving for the future. Those were the top 3 things that those who, again, older folks that have not had kids, that is what that has afforded them the ability to do. So, and when you look at the younger in this particular thing, those are exactly the same types of things that they want out of life, if you will. They want more time for things that they want, or hobbies and interests, or saving for the future. The only place that I thought that those was really interesting across the board, everyone though was worried about their care when they get older, having not had kids.
Right.
And that's really like the only thing that rang through as like the true thing that doesn't matter if you're 18 or 70, and if you've never had kids before, your biggest concern, who's going to be there when I get older?
Yeah.
Who's going to be there to care for me now that I don't have any children? Fascinating. I'm pulling back on commentary. I just think it's fascinating the where we're at in this, because I think if you had ran this research 40 years ago, it would have been dramatically different.
Yeah.
Dramatically different. So I don't know, your commentary.
Well, so this is one of those things that I think it's fascinating for me to look at this on where I am now, because I am 7 years into having my first, and I'm going to say 99% only child.
Yep.
And as someone who had a child late in life, I was 40, I didn't necessarily... I went through a good portion of my life not necessarily thinking I was ever going to have kids.
You can have optics in both of these worlds.
I kind of do, because there's a portion of time when I didn't think I was ever going to have kids. I didn't actually care if I did or not. I was kind of unconcerned about it. Just wasn't something that I had ever felt a compulsion or a need for. And then, and this was something when you do dig into some of the survey data, a lot of folks did mention that I think for some of the folks that were over 50 is they just never met the right partner, which I think that can have a lot to do with it as well.
Sure.
You know, when I met my wife and we started dating, and having children was a very important part of who she was and what she wanted out of life. And because I loved her as much as I did and wanted to be with her, I let it become something that was a more important part of my life. Now, granted, obviously, you have the kid, and I'm like, well, I can't imagine life without him at this point, and I can't imagine going back. So I understand how it can be difficult as a parent sometimes, and someone who's had children, to hear someone say, I just don't ever want to have kids. I just don't think I'm interested in it. I just don't want them. And I know sometimes as a parent, you're like, but they're fun. They can be cool. But again, as someone who went for a long time was like, I don't really want kids. I'm seeing these people having kids and it just looks miserable and I don't want to do that.
Yeah.
And your experience will be different from other people's, but it also can be sometimes not as great as people wanted to make it out to be.
Yeah.
My little soapbox to get on here is that I think there's a lot of reasons why we've reached this point where people are, one, more comfortable saying they don't want to have kids, and two, simply able to no longer to make that decision for themselves. One, I think a big part is the stigma's gone. Like, I think that was an interesting part of the study too, is they did ask a lot of folks, and they said it was only a very small percentage that they'd ever felt pressured at any point to have children.
That's a good point.
Which again, I think that's something you dial it back 30, 40 years.
Sure.
And that question would have been a lot different. Most people would say, you know, again, even when we were growing up, the expectation was you grow up and you have kids. Yeah. And I think for our parents, that was an expectation. And again, for generations before, it's like, yeah, it's part of life.
Understandably
You're
so.
not, you haven't had a successful life if you didn't have kids.
Well, yeah, but you go back 100 years and you're on a farm, you got to have kids.
Well, yeah, it's true.
There's certain environmental things.
There was we need to survive necessity
exactly
involved in that.
But we're not too far detached from that.
No,
when you think about it, 100 years is not in the grand scheme of things. It's not that long ago.
You're right.
But anyway, yeah.
But the other part of it to me is, and this is where I'm like, all right, I get it, because we also live in a world. I'm going to say we live in a country, because this is very unique to America in a way.
And this is a U.S.
We're unlike a lot of other, economically, sound and developed, civilized, whatever you want to call it, countries in the world. Cost of childcare is astronomical for a lot of people.
Yep.
There's a lack of parental leave and a lack of guaranteed parental leave for a lot of folks in the working world. There's an increasing difficulty for folks to get pregnant, or if you need to use other medical options to get pregnant, affordability to do that. I can speak to that from my own experience.
Yep.
There's a disproportionate burden on mothers, which there's always has been, but it still exists,
Always
unfortunately.
will be.
Even though I think the gender divide has become a little more cohesive than it has in the past. Still a lot of childbearing and child carrying or child care, even after they're born, is still falling on mothers. And also, I just think, unfortunately, we live in a country where there's a lot of policies that affected how people approach pregnancy and whether they feel comfortable getting pregnant and what could potentially happen when they are pregnant too. And I just feel like it's just created this kind of big pot of messiness right now that makes a lot of folks who, again, now that the stigma's gone away, and there's not necessarily a you've got to do this, if you want to have a good life and if you want life to work out the way it should, you have to have done this. I think it's made it a little easier for people to step back and go, you know what? I don't know that I want to be doing this right now. And I respect people that make that decision. Again, from my perspective now at this point, I've reached that point where I'm like, hey, I can't imagine life without my kid. But I also it hasn't also been that long since when I could very easily imagine my life without a kid, and I didn't, and I don't necessarily would have thought that I was missing anything at that point either.
Yeah.
Which is weird. It's a weird feeling to have. It's weird to be like,
sure.
I remember when I was fine with the idea that I was going to grow old and not have a kid.
Yeah.
But now I'm like, I can't imagine growing old without my kid.
Yeah.
And just the last thing I'll speak to you real quick is the whole having someone to take care of you when you get older. I feel like that unfortunately is problematic too. Because while I think there's a great amount of altruism there, and I think there's a lot of kids who do legitimately want to take care of their parents, again, also, I do think we live in something of a society where it's also increasingly difficult to do that.
Oh, sure.
And I feel like maybe for some folks are thinking like, I don't want to have kids that have to put in a situation where someday they're going to bear the financial burden of taking care of me while also trying to potentially start a family of their own as well. And again, we don't have a lot of that. I know, you can say maybe you don't like the social safety net stuff, but like, we don't have enough there in place to help out those folks when they reach that age either. So I feel like either end of the spectrum, we're kind of failing. We're failing our older generation. We're failing our younger generation. And maybe that's why people are saying like, I'm just not going to mess with it right now. I don't know. that's my soapbox. I'll jump down off of it and we can move on.
Yeah, too many things to dig into
there really is. I think you could,
I'm
sure there are, I mean, again, this is a very well-researched, paper they put out here. I'm sure there's all kinds of ridiculous amounts of socio-political and socioeconomic and
for sure.
Psychology and sociology in general digging into this that we may not quite fully understand for a long time. So,
well, I don't think we will, but to me, it just highlights the fact that societies are changing.
Yes,
and this to me is one of those that's fairly dramatic. It's like you can talk about fringe things or nuances in society, but this one's a pretty telling one. It's just as it relates to populations and or how we as a society, and I think you've highlighted several things that are a commentary on whether or not it's having an impact and whether it's positive or negative. You could argue all those things, but it's whenever you see statistics like this, and when you hear 57% of folks under 50 saying, "Nah," that's a lot of people. Yeah. That's a
I'm also change. Very curious is this something where, like, let's say we another 20, 30, 40 years in the future, we'd run this again. And if we maybe have reached a place where some of those particular issues I mentioned have been solved or resolved, and maybe we've caught up to where some other countries are.
I don't know that solves it all.
I mean, I wonder if that will change. I mean, I don't know. That's a good question. I don't know if it's simply that's just a prevailing attitude moving forward, or if more folks might feel more comfortable having kids when some of these other problems that are these hurdles to overcome are out of the way. I don't know.
I don't know.
I mean, I guess if we live long enough, maybe we'll get a chance to see it. Maybe we'll see what our kids are. I guess you have kids that are already getting on the precipice of making some of these decisions. So.
Well, apparently no. They've got another 30 years or so,
or are not making these decisions, holding them off for some time, I suppose. Yeah,
that's right.
All right, let's talk a little about some hybrid work here. This is one of these topics I always enjoy revisiting from time to time. And
yes.
There's a very interesting article where it was Harvard Business Review. It actually ran a study, basically an A/B test for hybrid work. So they work with a company called Trip.com, who I will say it was interesting when I dug into it. They specifically took China-based workers that they used for this population too. Maybe it's because they couldn't get away with it here in America for some reason. I don't know.
Wait, what?
So this was a study they did where over a 6-month period, they randomly assigned employees to work either 3 or 5 days in office.
Oh,
maybe it's one of those things you couldn't pull it off in America because people would be like, I'm not going to be the guinea pig for the 5-day when I could do the 3-day instead.
Yeah.
But anyway, they took 1,600 folks that were based in China, but still part of this business, this Trip.com business, and gave them the option, like, all right, we randomly took them. I think it was
I see.
By even
of
number,
40,000 employees, 1,600 China-based employees. Got it.
Right.
Yep.
So they either were going to work in the office 3 days a week, or they're going to work in the office 5 days a week. And then since that 6-month period, they did this, I think, around late 2021 or something like it, maybe.
Okay.
Since that 6-month period, they have analyzed over the next 2 years their performance reviews and basically like how did these folks do if they were in office all week long or only on a hybrid schedule.
Okay.
The results are basically almost no difference. No difference in productivity, no difference in performance grades, no difference in rates of promotions for these folks. And the one actual quote I'll pull out of the article that I found is a nice succinct way to wrap this up is, before the experiment, managers estimated hybrid would reduce productivity by 2.6%. After the 6-month experiment, they estimated it increased productivity by 1%. Those working under the hybrid model had a higher satisfaction rate and 35% lower attrition. Quit rate reductions were largest for female employees. That kind of goes back to what we were just talking about a little bit, because childcare usually is a reason why a lot of women do have to quit a job. Non-managers and those with the longest commutes, greater than 1.5 hours, also had significantly reduced quit rates under hybrid. So,
yeah,
this is one of those interesting studies. I'm like, all right, they did the A/B testing. They saw like what it's like for someone in office all week versus folks that were only in for 3 days. And basically the result was, doesn't really change anything. In fact, things seem to be going just fine, if not even better.
Yeah, right. Or at least in some aspects.
Yeah.
And it's curious that they pulled 1,600. Now I'm like, China related, because that's a different society and different demands over there and things of that nature. I don't know how much of an impact.
One of the study's contributors was actually the founder and maybe CEO of Trip.com who participated in this and participated in the write-up of this too. So someone that actually was invested in how this all turned out. But I don't know. It was one of those things I'm like, I feel like it's reinforcing what I think we all already know. But it's also good to hear in a time when you're starting to hear of more employers that are like, no, we don't want this. It's hurting productivity and we think things are going badly. And the data just seems to overwhelmingly keep bearing out that like, no, it's not really hurting things.
Yes and no. I don't know. I mean, because you hear about other things. I can see the point, but you hear about other things like, worker health is decreasing and things like, so it's like, I think the jury's still very much out about whether or not, there's certain social benefits to being in 5 days a week or whenever. The more that you're there, there's certain training aspects and things of that nature that are, I don't know that I have the surveys or whatever, the data to back it. But
where's your data, Dean?
Yeah, right. That feels better. But this is a curious one. Again, well, and this was 3 weeks, 3 days a week, right? 3 days versus
3
5
or
days.
5, yes,
Yeah, to me, I don't know that there's a huge difference there as opposed to, all remote or all in the office. That would be interesting. But clearly a lot of companies are, because the article starts off with talking about how a lot of companies are going back to 5 day. And to me, it's a lot of those companies that can.
That was my thing too. I've been talking about that, like when you say like the companies like the Googles of the world or like the big giant Silicon Valley tech companies, I'm like,
they're already competing.
You're paying these people 6 to 7 figure salaries, probably.
Yeah.
You've got all kinds of perks and benefits,
That's right.
and they're working in these like super high tech jobs that potentially are platforms to them starting their own companies and becoming mega millionaires. It's probably a little easier to convince those folks they need to come work 5 days a week
100%.
versus your average employer probably does not have quite that same leverage that tech companies do.
So again, like I said, as this all pans out, it's very interesting. Yet another data point, but that was my comment. Yeah, when Amazon calls people back, well, I mean, they're one of the most sought after employers.
Yeah, exactly.
Especially in white collar work, what I'll call white
they're
collar
not.
work.
Let's be honest. If an Amazon of the world, especially if you're working on the technical side and the corporate side or whatever, if someone's like, nope, I don't want to do this because I don't want to work in office all week, they're not going to have a hard time filling that job.
No.
Versus, I think there are a lot of other employers that might struggle with that a little bit more.
Yes, absolutely.
Not your tech giants. They're not going to.
Very interesting. I don't know.
All right, Dean,
it's a commentary.
Let's talk about some air taxis here. What's going on with that?
I'm interested in my fully autonomous air taxis and stuff like that. So the FAA
interested or terrified?
You're terrified. I'm okay with this. I can't wait for this world because how are we going to zoom around?
That's true. So and I will say once again, I think I'm more comfortable with the autonomous air taxi than a ground taxi. Because at least in the air, there's a lot less idiots
to bump into
that are flying on their own to bump into bump into you. For now, yes.
But the FAA has cleared the rights. They published a highly anticipated final regulation for electric vertical takeoff and landing vehicles. What is there's an acronym
VTOL.
For that. Thank you. EVOLT or EVOLT.
EVOLT. Yeah, because I think usually people refer to it as Volt, maybe.
Volt, yeah, or something like that. But anyway.
VTOL, I don't know.
VTOL. So anyway, it was interesting. There was some back and forth here because the FAA was, they said a couple years ago, we're going to do this under whatever it is called Part 23. It's a normal aircraft, but if it is designed in this, we're gonna allow a regulation pathway for that. And then they shut that down 3 years ago, and that created all this hubbub, and so they created a different certification. But at the end of the road, the FAA says that these power lift vehicles now will be the first completely new category of aircraft since helicopters were introduced in 1940. So, to quote the FAA administrator, Mike Whitaker, powered lift aircraft are the first new category of aircraft in nearly 80 years. So there you go. So now they have cleared the path, at least from a regulatory standpoint, where you can have these flying taxis, basically.
I did know that the article pointed out, like, hey, no one's actually able to do this yet. No. Like, we're still a long way from them being able to actually launch these and you being able to take a ride in one.
But you got a couple companies that are getting really close. And we've talked is it Joby? I think is one of them.
We brought that up at some point,
Yeah, I mean, I think they're like, I'm going to say within 5 years. I think they're really, really close to getting this out there. So I'm fascinated by it. yay.
Yeah,
You know,
let me ask you, what do you think is the practicality of these? Like, I get the concept. Do you think this is something that's just for big cities? Like,
Yes.
Like, because my thing was like, all right, this sounds like a great new way
That's
to
the
commute.
primary.
But the problem with that is like, all right, well, are you going to commute to anywhere close to where you actually work? You know, like, because I mean, unless you work for a company, unless you probably work for one of these giant tech companies, they might have your own helipad on the roof or something.
Right.
Most likely, it's. I mean, I guess it's no different than taking a subway or a bus or something. You potentially are getting dropped off somewhere and have to still hike it to wherever you're going.
Yep.
So yeah, so I feel like it's just for big cities. Like I don't know. Like I see where it's going to work and where it's going to happen, but I also am like,
follow the money. So,
Well,
so
true.
these taxis are probably going to be expensive at first.
True.
So
That's
here's
true.
how I see it being applied in a place like Cincinnati. You might be able to take one of these air taxis to CVG to get to the airport faster.
Yeah.
From
Okay. Yeah.
Indian
Yeah.
Hill.
Yeah.
Or from an affluent
Right.
suburb. You know,
Yep.
where
I get
it
that.
might take that person an hour to commute to get to it. Well,
Right.
no, now I'm just going to go to a
I mean, it's
central
obviously not
place.
going to land in your backyard or in your driveway or
but
anything.
you know, you could have a lift pad like somewhere in some parking lot.
Yeah.
I'm just going to park my car there, hop on this air taxi. It'll get me to the
Yeah.
plane in 10 minutes, you know, as opposed to rummaging through,
That's a very good point.
So
Yeah.
I think, you know, those are the types of applications, regional travel. You know, like we're in Cincinnati. Let's say I had a business meeting in Cleveland.
Yeah.
I think that some of these are going to be able to go, you know, hundreds of miles.
Man,
so that
I wouldn't
autonomously.
I mean, I've been saying this for a long time. Like, you know, as someone who lives in this northern Kentucky area, and getting to Cincinnati is always a nightmare, especially for big events and getting, you know, to baseball games and football games and all that kind of stuff.
Yep.
We've long needed some kind of form of mass transit, and like, there's been all this talk for years about potentially subways or trains or whatever.
Yep.
It's
Well, that's
never
where I was
gone
gonna go.
anywhere.
Never goes anywhere.
That's where I feel like maybe this is the solution. Maybe, you know,
I think it is.
You have an option.
Who
where,
needs high-speed rail when you can, you know, if you had a fleet of these,
Yeah.
you could just zip, now I can get to Cleveland, I can get to Chicago
Yeah.
and whatever very, very quickly.
Yeah,
You know,
definitely.
comparatively, and you don't have to put in all this infrastructure.
All right,
You're
I'm
you're
tentatively starting to
you're
buy
getting
in a little
these
bit here.
8-man little passenger things and
Yeah,
going, I don't
yeah.
know. You know, it's a good, it always starts right where people can't afford it, and then
Well,
it'll
yeah,
drip
of
down
course.
to you and I
Yeah.
someday. We'll be able to get on one of these.
You know, maybe
I still think it's cool to be able to get into one of these things. I think they'll be piloted at first, but ultimately you just get in one. I'm comfortable with my
Right,
car.
right.
Autonomous nature.
Right.
I get one. Zzz, vroom,
Maybe
go.
as noted celebrity podcasters on an award-winning show, we could get an early flight to test one of these out and talk about it.
Well, we don't have a chance of that unless they're somewhat local. I don't know. Yeah, right?
Yeah, that's a good point.
It
That's
might
not gonna
be
be
an
a while.
angle.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So what's up with you? What we're not answering the phone anymore.
No, I mean, I don't know why we ever did to begin with, but but apparently, especially if you're on the younger side of things, not only are you potentially not having kids and don't want to, but you're also just never answering the phone.
See, this gets to more of my philosophy that people are just shuttering themselves. But go ahead.
Maybe. So this
Yeah.
was an interesting article about why younger generations aren't answering the phone. So the statistics here, 1/4 of 18 to 34-year-olds never answer the phone. 70% say they prefer to text. They also said that they typically don't use ringtones. Half of them say that a call is almost always a bad thing, that it's usually bad news.
Bad
That's
news.
why
So
they
they're
don't
not.
answer.
Oh, I see.
There's some
I'm not going to answer
anxiety
that because
around it.
there's bad. Oh
Right.
my God.
And 37% said that they like leaving voice notes, sending voice notes for their friends, which apparently is one of
Like
these.
on text?
Is a
Yeah.
massive divide apparently with older generations. Like I think the older generations, like only like 6% said that they found any value in recording a voice memo and sending it over text.
Right. Yeah.
Which I'll be honest,
I've
not
never
something
done
I
that
do.
before.
I rarely ever do it myself.
Yeah.
So I mean, this is one of those things. Like, there's not a lot to talk about here, but I just always find this an interesting divide here. But I also will say, I'm kind of with the younger gens a little on this. And it's funny because, like you and us and of our generation, I grew up with, where you only had a landline. We didn't have text.
Sure. Oh, no.
We didn't have any.
Right, yeah.
If you wanted to talk to someone, you had to pick up a phone
And
that was
call.
attached to a wall or at least a long cord
Yep.
that you were wrapping around somewhere, taking to another room,
Yep.
and making a call. And I'm not going to say I didn't spend my plenty of my youth on the phone
Sure.
talking with friends.
Absolutely.
Like,
Right. Yeah.
Again,
Endless hours.
Right.
Just talking with people. Yeah.
but it's just not something I feel like not something I enjoy anymore. It's not something I do that
Well,
much.
I will admit that I will not answer the phone unless I know who's calling.
Exactly.
If it's I just had a call.
And even then,
We're-
unless it's someone I want to talk to, they're probably getting sent to my voicemail.
right. So I love caller ID. I remember when caller ID came out.
Yes.
I've been a big fan ever since it came out. So I don't disagree with any of that, but it is curious. Again, the younger generation just has very little interest in that human connection a lot of times, and that's, to me, that's a little bit scary. But I'm older and I'm used to it.
And I get a little bit the anxiety of it too, like, because again, I feel like when you do take a call from someone these days, it usually is something you don't want to have a conversation about, or it's something.
Well, sure, if those are the only calls you're taking, yes, that's going to happen.
So maybe that's what it is. Just like nobody's calling to chat, so if the phone does ring, it's like, what's going on?
Well, that's the world you've built for yourself. Is the only time that nobody's calling you now is when the shoot button is getting pressed.
Well, apparently this anxiety is also then bleeding over into the workplace too, which is, where people are like, well, that can cause some problems if you're not willing to take calls.
A lot. Yeah, especially if you're in a certain...
and you can tell there's sometimes you talk to folks of a certain age, or not even a certain age, but there's certain people that just clearly are just not good on phone calls. They're not good on, Zoom meeting, which I'm also like, I'm sorry, but I'm a little bit of the proponent of if you want your video off on a Zoom call, go for it. I do not care. Like, I'm fine with that. If it makes you more comfortable, I'll turn mine off too. I got no problem with that. We can talk without having to actually look at each other, especially because, let's be honest, sometimes you get on these calls, and let's say there's a lot of people on this call, and maybe your portion of it is very minuscule. Yeah. And I'm like, you know what? I could be doing other shit while I'm doing this.
Yeah, right.
I could be multitasking, getting some work done.
Yeah, well, I found the bigger the call, the more attendees, the more likely that not everybody's going to have it.
Exactly. So that's where I'm like, fine, let's go video off.
Oh, sure.
When you're not talking to me and I'm not talking to you and it's got nothing to do with me, I'm going to do some other stuff. I'll listen for my name and I'll jump back in when I need to. But otherwise, let's all just get on with our lives. And
so here's my big question for you. When are we going to stop calling this device a phone? When is this no longer the iPhone? If what did you say? 70%.
That's a great question.
Young folks. What is an iPhone?
I'm surprised.
Even mean to them?
I guess if it's not just for the fact that Apple is just like
they're bought
the
into
iPhone
it now.
is an iconic brand.
Are we bringing back PDA, personal digital assistant? Because that's kind of what it is.
You're right. I still I don't know if that there's going to be something new. Some Tech Valley genius, Silicon Valley tech genius, or someone at Apple potentially is going to come up with the next new name for our new devices.
Well, I think you and I could make $1 million, maybe even $1 billion, if we devise a device that is everything this is but the phone, market it accordingly to that younger generation. Oh no, this device doesn't even have a phone. Yeah. So alleviate your anxiety. You'll never get a phone call.
That's right. No one will ever call you on this because it doesn't function as one. Yeah. I honestly,
we could be billionaires.
I won't be surprised if we reach that point at some point. Like we just find other ways.
So what are we going to call it?
I don't know. The device, like my device, my black box, I don't know.
No, black box.
Black mirror.
No, not good. Not good. We got to think of something else.
If you got some ideas of what do you think the next iteration of the quote phone that's not really a phone anymore should be called. I'm also waiting for the day that someone changes up that phone icon to actually stop being the old school phone receiver. I remember because it was one of those things. Like at some point, I remember pointing it out to my son. Like he knows what it is. He understands. Like
he does
the call.
Yeah.
But like there was a point where I was like, "Do you understand what that little symbol?" And he goes, "That's just like the call symbol." And I'm like, "Yeah, but do you know why it's the call symbol?" And I had to tell him, explain to him, like
that's a handset.
Like, hey, that old movie we watched where someone picked that phone up and like that's what it looks like as that. And he's going, "Oh, I get it now."
Oh man!
Let's talk about the meaning of U.S. state names, Dean. So this is one of those interesting little articles.
I just stumbled across this one of these little vivid map type of things, and it's just one of those fun things to look at. So if you see it in the show notes, click on it. It'll take you less than 3 minutes to breeze through. But what it gives you is what is the actual the meaning?
Etymology.
Thank you. The etymology of the name of not just the state but also the capitals within those states.
I thought that was kind of cool too.
As you can imagine, most of the stuff on the East Coast has to deal with I don't know, English people and
Let's pause there for a moment because that was something I specifically wrote down. Why is so much of New England named after Brits? Right. The whole point of us coming here and fighting a revolution
to get away from
to get away from the British monarchy. But we're naming all of our states after the Virgin Queen Mary.
I think the king at the time,
George.
Yeah, but they probably had something to do with that in the very beginning. But
then why haven't we changed it?
Fair. now that's fair.
Why
is it still
we were
New
like,
York?
all right, we're independent. We're changing up the name of these states.
Yeah, because New York is the land of the Duke of New York. Of York, I'm sorry. So it's like, can we rename it New York?
Yeah. I mean, I get now we're too far past that.
We're too far.
I'm surprised that didn't happen like post-revolution. Like, hey, you know what? We should change up the name of these states because they're still named after these people that we just fought to get away from and that we don't so like right now. I don't know.
I don't think they were inspired to come up with good names because when you look at everything,
they had other stuff on their minds.
West of the Mississippi, it's all Indian related. At least
a good point.
Most of it is. So what would they have renamed it like? Instead of New York, it would have been Lakota, or I don't know.
That's a good point. Yeah.
So,
or because I don't know if you noticed, a bunch of stuff's named after geographical stuff.
Yes,
like bodies of water.
Michigan means great water. Ohio means beautiful river.
We're too creative with a lot of these, but beautiful river. Yeah. Have you seen it, the Ohio lately?
Yeah, it's not a beautiful river. Or
maybe back then it was.
Wisconsin is wild rushing channel. Minnesota means sky tinted water. There's just a lot of good stuff in here.
I like that, and I'm assuming that was probably a Native American name.
Missouri. That's what all.
I'm sure the bulk of these were.
A bulk of them are. Missouri means muddy water. I like Iowa. Iowa stands for sleepy ones.
Yeah.
So I guess if you lived in Iowa, you were sleepy, and that's how you got named. Here we are in the great Commonwealth of Kentucky. Do you know that stands for the land of tomorrow? Doesn't that have a nice futuristic?
It does. And then
when I think about Kentucky, I don't think of land of tomorrow. Do you, brother?
I'm sorry. I love my state, but we haven't always been notable for being the forward-thinking part of the country necessarily. So yeah, I find that one kind of fascinating.
Did you know that Alabama means weed gatherer?
No, if Alabama were smart, they'd lean into that.
They would.
They would totally lean into that.
We are the weed gatherers. Yeah. Yes. Oh, that's brilliant. Yes.
There has to. I'm going to assume. I don't always remember which states haven't legalized cannabis. I'm going to assume Alabama probably hasn't.
No.
But when they do, they're better. You better be the first dispensary that rushes to be called weed gatherer.
Weed gatherer.
You have to.
And now you have the inside information
of
why that's relevant.
You need to copyright that, and you need to make that a big point of you're a destination because you are the official Alabama dispensary of some sort. That's a smart marketing idea I'm giving away for free right there.
There it is. And did you know that Texas means friend? Friend.
I did not know that. Friend. Come on down to friend.
Come on down to friend, or come down to the flowery one, which is Florida. So anyway, it was just you don't have to go deep on this one.
I think my favorite here might be California, mythical island Califia. Which, first of all, it makes me think of that, whatever that brand of soy milk or something, maybe.
Yes.
Califia or whatever. Yeah.
Califia.
Isn't that what it is? I assume that has something to do with that, too. So.
Yes.
Yeah, a lot of the capitals on here I found interesting, too, because most of them are just named after people for the most part.
Yeah, it's like generals and politicians.
Kentucky here, our capital is Frankfurt.
Yeah.
And it's in honor of Frank's Ford. Now, first I was I thought Frank Ford like it was maybe a person. But then I'm like, no way. This specifically says Frank's the
Ford.
Possessive apostrophe S. Frank's Ford. What does that even mean?
But not a Ford like a car.
No, I'm assuming not. And it's not even a Ford. If it was Ford, I'd be like, all right, some guy named Frank had a Ford.
No. So now you got me Googling. What is a Ford?
I feel like we do kind of actually need to know this one a little bit.
Ford? I don't think it's going to tell me. Let's see here, because I think it's it has something to do with a shallow place. There it is.
Okay,
a shallow place in a river or stream, allowing one to walk or drive.
Is that the same as a fjord? FJORD?
No, a fjord is something bigger. Now you're in the Nordics.
Okay, that's what I thought. Yeah,
lake, more lakeish.
So we have a word for. So we have a fjord and a ford that are all bodies of water.
Yes.
So some dude named Frank had a ford.
He had a shallow place in the river where you could walk across it.
So we decided to name it capital. All right. Why not?
Have you ever been to Frankfurt?
I have.
There is a little creek running through it.
I think maybe that's it.
There's
maybe
a Ford there.
That's Frank's Ford. All right.
There you go, brother.
I'll have to remember that. So,
So anyway, go click on it. It's fun. It's bubblegum. It's bubblegum kind of fun.
Yeah, exactly. Quick little read. Find your state to laugh at it. Go maybe look up what it actually all really means.
Almost as good as the next one you got here. Worst workplace jargon. This one's pretty classic.
So this is one of those. This is a Glassdoor article where they basically did like an NCAA style bracket. Where workers could actually vote on, like workers on Glassdoor could vote on the worst workplace jargon. I found this utterly baffling because I'm going to be honest with you. 2 of the final 3 I have never heard someone say in the workplace.
What?
So of the final...
Wait, what? Are you serious right now?
Okay, of the final 3 on this list, let's double click on that.
You've never heard somebody say that?
No, what is that?
Oh my God, I hear that all the time right now.
Really?
Let's dive deeper, which is another one.
That one, okay, I've heard that. I understand what that means.
This is actually coming out of the West Coast. I think most tech companies, anytime I'm in a conversation with
I guess that's what it is. So it's
people,
literally meaning like when you double click on an image and it zooms in?
Yeah. God, instead of like, let's hover on that or let's explore that a little bit more, let's double click that. I hear that all the time. I'm equally like fed up with it.
The other semifinalist, which is one I am familiar with, let me circle back with you. I'm not going to lie. I've probably said that a few times myself.
Yep. Let me circle back with you on that.
I'm not utterly offended by that one.
No, that one doesn't seem so bad.
At least again, it makes some sort of sense. Like, although I guess it's just saying like, hey, I'm going to go in a big loop and come right back. And this is probably going to be your problem again. I don't.
Yeah.
But the number one that won, we're building the plane as we fly it, which again, a phrase I understand. I've heard the phrase. I've never heard it used in the workplace.
Oh, I have. Yeah. I've heard it several times. Like, because we're starting a new initiative. Nobody's ever done it before. Well, we're building the plane as we're flying.
Which I'm sorry, but if someone says that, that does not inspire me with any kind of confidence.
Of course not. Yeah, how can you actually build a plane when you're flying it? It's like, what? Wait, what?
You are, well, hey, I'd like you to build it first.
Yeah.
I'd like you to run it through a bunch of tests, get some regulatory approvals.
You're not an entrepreneur.
I mean, I don't know if you've noticed, but planes have not had the best track record over the last few years, especially one particular model of plane. But
yeah. I always make note if I'm on a 737
I don't consider. I mean, I'm in agreement with that. And if that one is some corporate jargon that's being regularly used in your business, it does need to go.
I just thought this article is really good in the sense of the way they get it. So the brackets. Can I go into some of the other bracket words?
Yes, please do.
So in the let's double click it bracket, let's double click on that. Here are some other jargons that you might have heard. Loop me in on that. Or I'd like to flesh this out, or I don't want to reinvent the wheel. All of those are corporate jargon. Of course, let's double click on that one. Let's go down a little bit to the other one where let me circle back to you. Well, here's the other ones that were in that bracket. That's low-hanging fruit. We say that.
I've said that.
We're guilty of that.
We've said that on the podcast. Yeah.
Yes. Can we put a pin in this? Now, that one I don't know that I've ever heard.
I've heard it. I don't like it because it's basically a way of someone saying, like, I'm done talking about this, so shut up.
Put a pin in it to blow it up, be done with it?
Well, that or just even
pin it and hang it.
We're pinning it somewhere and putting it away. But I think in reality, when someone typically says that, what they mean is, I'm done speaking about this.
Yes,
and I probably don't want to be talking about it.
Got it. And then the next one is my bandwidth is tight. I'm guilty of that. I talk about bandwidth and people's bandwidth.
I think I have said my bandwidth is a little narrow right now or something to work on something. Yes.
So the last 3 that were in the bracket for we're building the plane as we fly it, that won't move the needle. Yep. I use the move the needle all the time. Let's do a deep dive.
Okay. I'm pretty sure our last episode we said let's do a deep dive and do another survey.
And then finally, worst jargon is, can we take this offline?
Which I think
I just think this whole thing was brilliant.
Funny because what you really mean is, can we take this off of this call?
Yes.
Usually most people are saying that like on a Zoom call
as a courtesy.
Which I think is great.
I use it
Smart
as a courtesy.
Idea, yes.
Like, we're into some little nuance here that really, it doesn't take this group of 8 people.
Right.
There's only 2 or 3 that need to be focused
I do appreciate when someone, that one's one I'm like, don't get rid of that because I appreciate when someone says that.
We're not throwing
that's
that
someone
one out.
valuing your time. Like, hey, I'm going to take this offline because all these other people don't need to listen to us banter about
this. Yes. Got it. All right, fair enough.
So there you go. There's
thought it was a good
some
little
bad
article.
corporate jargon that apparently you need to get rid of in your workplace.
So finally, we get to the article that I admittedly teed up for you.
You so did.
I absolutely did because I
saw
came
this
across
and
this.
I'm
I'm
like, well, this is where we're going to end the episode.
how does
and
John not have this on his Tech Bytes?
Dean has to know what I'm getting, what he's getting into by spoon feeding this one to me.
So the article it's a Rolling Stones article, the 100 best TV episodes of all time. I love bold claims like that.
I'm
but
a
anyway,
sucker for this kind of stuff.
very much a sucker.
You give
for
me
it.
a list like this, and I will read every bit of it.
Did you read every
I wasted
single
an
one?
entire hour this morning doing this. You realize? I mean, it was research for the podcast, so you still have to pay me for it.
I'm sorry to have put you through that.
Oh,
Yes.
I was so upset too. I was
Yes.
like, oh, Dean's making me
Right,
read
right,
about
right.
television that I like.
I was only going to get into the top 10, but even the top 10, even though I know I queued this up for you, it's like, I really queued it because, all right, so the top 10, and I'm not going to give you the episodes, but there are shows like The Shield. It was number 9. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm starting at 9, not 10. Oh, I didn't write down number 10. Roots Part 2, got it. That was number 8. A great episode. Shears, never heard. Oh, no, Cheers. I'm sorry.
Right.
It
Cheers.
spelled correct me on my The Showdown. The whole Sam and Diana romance, wonderful. Mad Men I've seen before. That was number 6. It's an episode called The Suitcase.
Yep.
Seinfeld, The Contest is flipping
absolutely
awesome.
iconic. Yes,
Brilliant.
I love what I also like about this list is one of those ones that does a lot of little deep dive into these
Yes.
episodes. Like there's a lot of context and there's a little write up for every one of them.
Yep.
And I like how they talk about how they weren't sure that NBC was going to let them
Even let
do
them
this
do it.
episode, and
Well,
it turned out they
like,
were more
they're not
chill
gonna
with
do
it than
they
thought.
Yeah. I'll let you riff on this in a second. Sopranos, never watched it, don't know.
I haven't
Leftovers, never heard of it, don't know. Simpsons, of course. You could pick multiple Simpsons episodes, I
I
think.
found that one because that was one like I didn't even. I'm
Not
sure
that
I've seen
particular
it.
episode? Yeah, I've never seen it.
Most people cite the episode about the monorail. I think Marge versus the monorail, I think was the name of it. I think that's usually one most people cite as the greatest Simpsons episode. So I was surprised by that.
Not knowing
one.
where you're going to go, but we could dive into that. And then the final one is Breaking Bad. Number 1, Breaking Bad.
Ozymandias.
I never seen Breaking Bad, so I don't know. I know. So anyway,
again, this is why you had to tee this up for me because I've got all the thoughts here.
You got the thoughts.
All right, so
we're going to start with the top 10, or where are you going to start?
no,
on
I'm
this?
starting down at 86. No, I'm just. So I'm sitting there reading through this, and first of all, I've probably seen more than half of these.
Oh wow!
I would guess if I didn't I
Really?
didn't count until I got like in the top 25, and then I'd say I'd seen it maybe all but like 7 or 8 of the top 25.
That's
The
impressive.
top 15, I think it was all but maybe 3 or 4 overall.
Okay. All right.
But I'd say on the overall list, if I counted them, I wouldn't be surprised if I came out like a 60 to 70% hit rate for most of
That's
these.
impossible.
I watch a lot of television.
That's impressive. Yeah.
Which say what you will about that. You can make your own judgments about what that says about me.
Well, you had a lot of time in your earlier years.
I
right?
did, and I still love
Pre-miles.
television. I
Yeah,
still try to squeeze in an hour or 2 of TV every night when I can before
Right.
bedtime.
Yeah.
I'm still a big fan. All right, I'm gonna highlight a few of some of my favorites here that I wanted to make note of.
Yes.
Number 86 was San Junipero, part of Black Mirror.
I gotta watch this
my
show.
favorite episode of
Gotta
the
watch
series.
this show.
What's funny is that show is typically a kind of tech nightmare type show where it's like everything that can go wrong with technology
Yep.
and how it can be part of our dystopian landscape and how things could go wrong in a very short amount of time. San Junipero is probably the most enlightening and uplifting and beautiful episode of the
I
entire
see.
series.
Okay,
It's
and
one of the
that
few
is-
times you watch one and go like, man, I hope this actually is the place we end up in technology someday because this is awesome.
And that's season 3, episode 4, by the way. But
Yes.
anyway, yeah.
Yeah, and again, I'm going to say also spoiler alerts potentially of some of the stuff I'm going to mention here. But if you read this article, lots of spoilers for big important episodes of a lot of series.
Oh,
So
totally fair.
if you haven't watched the show and you plan to, I don't recommend reading about these particular
Yes.
episodes as you get to them.
It'll spoil it. Yeah.
The next one that I wanted to highlight was the Good Place season 1 finale because it's the kind of episode that I was very much on the fence with this show.
What number is this one? You remember?
It's number 73.
Okay.
I was on the fence with this show, and then the season finale changes the entire scope of the series in such an amazing way that you are now on board for the rest of the series.
I'll be darned.
It is
Okay.
that good of a finale, and is that
So you had to go 12 episodes in because this
Yeah.
is the 13th episode.
yes.
Okay.
So, and now, granted, I'm not saying it wasn't fun to watch,
Yeah,
but it
yeah,
was one of
yeah,
those
yeah.
things where I'm like, this is fine. I don't know if I'm going to stick with it. And then there's a pivot and a twist that I didn't see coming at all. That made the rest of it. I'm like, all right, I'm on board with wherever this show
And
goes.
so, how many
there.
seasons did it have after that? Do you remember? More.
4, I think.
Oh, okay.
3?
4
It was
total?
only 3, Marco. Marco's saying 3.
Yeah.
Okay. It wasn't a lot. I mean, like
The Good Place. This is worth watching.
It's a good, fairly short binge. It's a really fun show. It's a show that actually it's very funny, but it also makes you think about a lot because it deals with the afterlife.
I see. Okay.
All I'll say, the simple premise of the show is a group of people find themselves in heaven and are questioning kind of why they're there.
Got it. Okay. Fair enough.
And from there you should discover the rest on your own. It stars Ted Danson and what's her name? Kristen. I cannot think of her last name now off the top of my head.
All right.
Anyway, highly recommend it. Great show.
Kristen Bell.
Kristen Bell, yes. Yep. Highly recommend checking it out.
Mm-hmm.
If you're a fan of like Parks and Rec or The Office, some of the same people that produce those shows made
I
a good
see.
place.
I got you.
Michael Schur is well-known guy.
Right.
There. Number 62, the finale, the season 1 finale for Severance. Season 2 is finally coming in January. I've been waiting for this show for a couple years to come back. It kept getting delayed.
You are
by the strikes and
You've
stuff.
been talking about.
I've
this
mentioned
one,
this show on
quite
the
a few
pod
times.
before.
Yep,
I think.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Highly recommend. I'm going to go back and rewatch it, especially as a interesting workplace satire / drama / dystopian.
Right.
I don't know. It's hard to, especially in our hybrid workspace world, where it's a very literal hybrid workspace where people that go to work forget their outside life while they're at work and don't remember their work life when they're outside of it.
Yes.
Work.
Yes.
Fascinating show, and the
fascinating
finale
for that.
was a big game changer. Why I'm excited for the new season. Number 45 was an episode of the comedic series Barry, which wrapped up, I think, a year or so back.
I'd never heard of that.
Hands down the best episode of the series. It's so maniacal and weird and twisted of an episode. And it was directed by Bill Hader, who's the star of the show, and star and creator of the show. Again, fun show, recommended. You can find that on HBO Max, I believe. I'm going to skip one here because it's actually part of my TEConnecting. Fleabag at number 24. Cannot tout Fleabag enough. 2 seasons. Brilliant British sitcom. I wouldn't even call it a sitcom, more of like a dramedy.
Okay.
On Amazon Prime. It's a short number of episodes. I want to say it's maybe 10 episodes total.
Okay. All right.
10, 12 total.
Never heard of it, by the way.
This is the season 2 premiere they mentioned that introduces the hot priest. Great, wonderful, beautiful, perfect show. It's like hands down an amazing show.
All right.
Number 22, Buffy the Vampire Slayer of the Body. This is an episode.
Really?
If I was making my own list, might be number 1.
Whoa, that's a bold claim.
I wrote a college paper on this episode.
Wow.
And
it's Buffy the Vampire Slayer, dude.
I still cannot watch this episode without breaking down and crying.
Really? It's that impactful?
It is an emotionally devastating episode.
Wow.
About the death of a character.
Yeah.
And if you know anything about Buffy, it's about vampires and werewolves and all kinds of monsters that this girl has to fight. Although I think Buffy in general is an amazing show. If you look beyond that premise, it's an amazing coming of age show and just a brilliant use of that kind of like magical and mythical type stuff or whatever. But The Body, it has very little of any of that in it. It is just a raw emotional show about death and its consequences and what it means for people when someone dies.
I'll be darned.
Absolutely brilliant.
Okay.
Love that episode. I was very happy to see that on the list. Number 15, where I promised we're getting to the ends of one I wanted to highlight. My list was much longer and I cut a lot of them out. Community.
Yes.
One of my favorite sitcoms. Again, some of the same folks that worked on The Good Place, Office, Parks and Rec.
Yep.
Community, great, almost underrated and unseen.
Never heard of it.
Not as seen as it should be show.
Where can I see this?
Used to be on Netflix. It might still be. Definitely recommend binging this one. It's a fun show.
Okay.
This episode is called Remedial Chaos Theory,
Uh-huh.
and it basically deals with alternate universes.
Nice.
This is a show that starts as a weird college sitcom about a bunch of people going to a community college, and turns into one of the most bizarre meta commentary shows that is constantly referencing itself and referencing pop culture and looping back on itself in so many ways that I've rewatched it 3 times and pick up on new stuff every time. Great cast, wonderful show. This particular episode basically involves people getting together for a game and how a roll of the die, a different roll of each different side of the die creates 6 different realities, and you get a glimpse of all those realities in one episode.
Whoa, that's cool.
And it's hilarious.
Yeah.
Number 9, The Shield finale.
Never heard of The Shield.
Fantastic show. Great Great drama. It was on FX back in the day. I think you can stream it on Prime or Hulu. I think it's on Hulu now, I believe. Mm-hmm. Does have one of the all-time great finales. Very satisfying and unsatisfying, but unsatisfying in a I like what this show did. Kind of
you didn't. Not a bad taste.
I didn't feel cheated. Kind of. Yes.
Yeah, right.
Number 3, The Leftovers. This is a show that not enough people know enough about. This
never heard of it.
Short-lived 3 seasons, I think.
Yeah. Okay. On
HBO. I'm pretty sure it's streaming on Max now. It's from some of the same folks that made Lost and Watchmen. It's the basic premise is a world where 2% of the population randomly disappeared one day.
Oh, okay.
And how the remaining folks have dealt with the fallout and the consequences of that. But it takes so many weird left turns and get into some surreal territory. The episode they call it out is probably one of the most surreal and bizarre of the entire series. But it is a great show. It's another show that I also feel like has an all-timer finale that will leave you. If you're someone who needs a lot of closure, you might be a little frustrated by it. But for someone like me who likes where the ambiguity that shows can leave you sometimes, I finished that one going, I love this show.
Yeah.
And I love this finale.
Yeah.
And then finally, Breaking Bad, Ozymandias.
Yes.
That is the best episode of what I think is the best series of all time.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And I hands down appreciate it. I think that episode is near the end of the series. It's like maybe 3 or 4 episodes.
Season 5, episode 14.
Yeah, I think there was only maybe 2 episodes after that, 2 or 3.
Oh,
to wrap
okay.
the
So
series
this is
up.
really close. Okay.
It's the big game-changing episode where just Walt's world falls apart and where he sows what he has reaped for the previous multiple seasons of the series.
Yeah.
It is a show I do highly recommend. It's a show I've gone back to and rewatched many times.
Breaking Bad, the whole series?
Still find it utterly amazing every time I watch it.
I'll be darned.
And this is the kind of list I go through it and I'm like, well, now I feel like I want to go back and watch Breaking Bad again. Because you're right, that episode is so amazing. And it's worth it when you get there. So.
Yeah.
Honestly, you could fill a list like this with probably like a dozen episodes from that series, and I wouldn't get mad at you.
Right. Yeah. It was that well. All
right.
Yeah.
I'm done talking about TV. As always, all the links to this stuff are in our show notes. Go check that one out. You might find some good new TV that you want to watch. Don't hesitate to reach out to me and talk to me about some of this stuff. Believe me, I love these conversations.
I was just glad to see I Love Lucy and the job searching make 19. A lot of these were, some of them I didn't, some of them I knew, but a lot, I would say a majority of these have been shot in the last 20 years.
Yes, I will say that's what I found actually that I liked about this list is I've seen a lot of lists like this over time. And again, I'm always a sucker for them, but a lot of them will lean on a lot of like old stuff. Not that there's anything wrong with the old classics. I think there are. That I Love Lucy episode is one of the absolute classics, one of the funniest episodes. One of the funniest comedy half hours you'll ever watch.
Yes.
So I agree with a lot of that stuff, and I think there are a lot of good old television. But television has gone to a whole new blaze, I think, in the last, let's say, 20 to 30 years or so.
Oh, for sure it has.
And I think there's some stuff out there that, like, I still think we are living in a golden age of television that just, there's better stuff happening in TV than is happening in movies for the most part these days. And I appreciated this list because it very much leaned in. I could tell it was a list made by someone like me.
Yeah, right.
A lot of someone.
You should have been
me.
on this. This panel.
Rolling Stone, call me up. I'll be on your panel. I'll be in complete agreement probably with most of your stuff. So
good stuff.
All right, I'm losing my voice, so we need to wrap this up here. As always, thanks so much to our TEConnect sponsors. We appreciate your support on the show. Like and subscribe. Tell us your Tech Bytes. Send us articles that you'd like us to riff about on future episodes because, let's be honest, we're doing one of these at least every, couple months now.
Yes.
So send your ideas into us. As always, you can find us on BlueStar's LinkedIn page, BlueStar's Facebook page, or email us anytime, TEConnect@BlueStarInc.com. All right, Dean, let's wrap up as always a little bit of what's TEConnecting with you.
Yes.
Something in the world of, basically it's just us, it's us
time.
doing another tech bite of sorts, but just maybe a slightly shorter version that we don't need to riff on for as long. So what's TEConnecting with you?
Plants wiggle to maximize exposure to sunlight. Did you know that? Did you know plants wiggle?
I know plants move.
No, they wiggle, dude. So a new study, of...
it makes me think of like Groot from Guardians of the Galaxy when he's dancing at the end,
Well, they've gotten to the bottom, this quirky behavior of growing plants and this kind of mystery around plants being able to do. And so they did a study on it, and 2 fascinating things came out of it that I'll call out. Number 1, plants wiggle to find sunlight, which I guess makes sense.
I mean,
like they used controlled environments where obviously, they put sunlight in a certain area and the plant would start to grow, and it literally it would grow towards that, number one, which seems intuitive, but the other part, they wiggle to let other plants or some other plants get light as well. So they're wiggling not just for their own benefit, but so they use like sunflowers, for example, in this particular study. And, the sunflower would wiggle to get its enough sunlight for its needs. Right, but it also, they determined through AI and kind of following with the path of how these things were growing, they determined that they're wiggling so that they would shed more light on other plants around them. So they weren't necessarily hogging all of the sunlight, which I found quite fascinating. So there you go. You've got greenhouse experiments that are out there, but now, the question is, do plants wiggle? Well, indeed they do. And there's a reason why they're wiggling.
All right.
But again, and then the article commented is, it all happens so slow that you and I don't recognize it, right? I mean, we're sitting there, it happens way too slow. We don't have the attention span to sit there and say, oh, it's wiggling in this regard or that regard. Right. Unless we were to have it super time lapse, like anything, that's what you see, right? Yeah. Oh, this is time lapse of 2 months worth of whatever. But so they used that. They used AI. They came up with these things. Pretty fascinating.
Okay. All right. Well, I get it. I mean, I guess maybe, I always think of plants' movement like, it's one of those things like, that plants move to the sun.
Right.
But I guess I've never thought about like, that's probably not just like turning its head like, there's a sun over there.
Yeah,
I'm going for it right now.
Yeah.
Because we would see that if that was actually happening.
That's right.
So it's more of a gradual wiggle. Okay.
Yes.
And wiggle. I like that. I mean, did you ever see it's probably, if not the worst, but the almost worst M. Night Shyamalan movie, The Happening?
No.
Which is basically all about plants deciding to eliminate people.
Yes. Okay. Got it. Yeah.
And it makes me think of that. Like, the plants that are maybe a little more going on there than we like to ascribe to plants.
A little bit more aggressive.
Sometimes.
Yes.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
Yes.
So maybe they're going to wiggle their way into destroying the human population.
So what you got?
All right. I'm just going to wrap up with one more of these TV recommendations because it's an actual streaming recommendation for you. I just recently found out this was an episode that was on the list at number 25. There's a series called Homicide: Life on the Streets.
Okay.
Probably not terribly well known, even though it lasted, I think, 7 or 8 seasons on NBC back in the 90s. It was like early through mid 90s or so.
Okay.
This show was one of the, if you like shows like The Wire or The Shield, The Sopranos maybe, or any of these like gritty cop shows.
Yes.
Homicide was pretty much one of the first to really do the dark, gritty, character-focused, day-in-a-life type cop shows.
I see.
Of a homicide unit in Baltimore. It actually was based on a nonfiction book by David Simon, who also went on, who was one of the folks who did The Wire, one of the executive producers on The Wire, who basically spent a year, he was a journalist in Baltimore and spent a year in a homicide unit in Baltimore.
I see.
Wrote a book about it.
To get his materials.
And they developed it into a TV show, a fictionalized TV show about homicide cops. Great series. It has just recently been released for streaming on Peacock. Now, mind you, I watched this episode back in the 90s. I had bought some of the DVD box sets back in the day. That was the only way you could see this show for probably a good 20, 30 years.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And now Peacock apparently is streaming it. I just happened to stumble upon it, started watching the first episode literally last night. Was excited to see one of the episodes, which is probably one of the best episodes of the series, 3 Men and a Dina.
That's serendipity right there. You just started watching this. Yes.
But they even did like a nice HD upgrade. So even though like it was filmed back in the old SD boxy days of television, they've done an HD upgrade. So it looks great on a modern screen.
Gotcha.
Definitely recommend this show. Great character drama, has some amazing characters, a lot of folks that are now well known have got their start on that show. They even did some crossovers of Law & Order. Law & Order was on at that point already, too.
Oh, really?
And in fact, the character of John Munch, who has been a staple of Law & Order for a very long time, played by Richard Belzer, originated on Homicide.
This? Oh, really?
His character, Richard Belzer has been in the most TV episodes of any character of all time. Like that character, John Munch, has been in more TV shows of any character of all time because he originated in Homicide, spent 7 years on that show, then jumped over to Law & Order full-time and has been on, I think he might still be on some iteration of Law & Order right now. I think he was on SVU for a long time. I don't know.
Yeah.
So, good show. Recommend you watch it. If you're looking for a good streaming show to watch. Check that out on Peacock. Peacock's a fairly cheap platform if you're not normally subscribed to it. It's one of the more inexpensive ones.
It's like $4.
You get it with ads. Yeah, I think it's like $5-6 something like that. So. But it's worth it to watch the show alone. All right, that's what's TEConnecting with us. I'm done talking about television for the day.
For now,
but never really done. So until next time, we do have to unplug, but go out there and build the plane while you fly it. Double click on that like button. Circle back around to our next episode, and as always, stay connected. TEConnect Podcast is brought to you by ELO and their new Quick Ship program, expediting deliveries of select Intel-based all-in-one touchscreen computers. The Quick Ship initiative promises readily available inventory of ELO POS and iSeries 2 models with various processors, memory, and storage options. Additionally, they include Celeron models in the program at reduced prices. I mean, people are always saying, hey, stock can be a problem, and it's hard to get things, and hard to get it in timely fashion.
For sure.
ELO is trying to help you solve that problem. So ELO will ship the applicable SKUs to BlueStar within 10 business days. Whoosh. Check out the link in the show notes for a list of eligible products. Quick Ship program is limited to North America and Latin America and quantities of 20 units or less. Contact the BlueStar ELO team with any questions.